Hello and welcome back to FatbossTV. Today we're having a look at the brand new 5-man dungeon that's been released on the Legion Alpha, which is the Darkheart Thicket.
Yes, and the Darkheart Thicket is a little glimpse of what the Emerald Nightmare might look like. It's pretty much Everbloom, but red instead of green.
Yeah.
And it's very much like Everbloom as well, because there's far too much trash, and the trash is very irritating. But yeah, it's pretty much been corrupted by Xavius, and Malfurion's been captured, and you're going in there, saving Malfurion, killing Xavius, and it's a very, very cool looking
It's
instance.
not actually Xavius.
Oh, it's like a shadow of Xavius or something. But either
yeah.
way, instance looks beautiful. And even though it is kind of, corrupted forest, they've got lots of different sort of areas. Like you've got one that's like a swamp, and then you've got this whole area where it's like a misty area. It's so cool. The whole place is very unique, and you go through a night elf town. It's great. Really, really cool.
Now, as you first descend into the instance, you do come across some very vicious trash packs. And like Alex said, there is a ridiculous amount of trash in this place. Initially, the trash consists of corrupted druids that shapeshift into like corrupted animals. These do a crazy amount of damage, especially the Nightclaw enemies. They can apply a really, really nasty dot to certain people. And if you've got a couple of these guys up, they can actually all jump onto the same target. And that will pretty much cause that player to die, well, very, very, very quickly. So it's very important when you are doing this trash, at least how it is on the alpha right now, it's important that you kill these off first.
You also come across some corrupted bears with like festering boils all over them and shit. It's really, really nasty.
Yeah, a bit gross.
They do have a cast that will interrupt spell casting, so if you do pull them with a big pack, do make sure you don't get interrupted, especially as a healer, because once again, everything's doing so much damage in this place. You've really, really got to make sure that you're doing as much healing as possible. You also come across some plants that will stick themselves in the ground and spawn a gas cloud around them, which deals a lot of ticking damage. And because these come in packs of 4, you pretty much need to keep moving with these to escape their gas cloud, which really, really sucks for melee, because you can never attack the same target. It's just a mess. This whole place is... It's just a mess for melee DPS. I'm so sorry. You also come across a giant swamp giant, like he's all corrupted, and he places horrible goo on the floor that absolutely destroys you. The goo's only ever in melee. Sorry, melee DPS. And you also get griffins that charge you, and casters that do starfire, and there's loads of patrolling packs that just go between trash packs, and they're really vicious by themselves anyway. It's just... let's just say there's a lot of trash, and you need to be very careful. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just... take it slow and steady.
There's too much trash.
There is a little bit too much trash, yeah. Maybe they need to take it back a bit, or maybe just reduce the health or something, because it can get a bit tedious before you even get to see the first boss.
So once you've actually fought your way through 10 Everblooms worth of trash, you will finally come to an area that's been protected by Druid Preservers. And this area that you come into is just all lush and green. And then the first boss appears and he kills all the druids off. Yep. So it's now your job to kill off the boss. Now
this boss is Archdruid Gladerless. And this is getting a bit of a reoccurring theme, and it actually continues, is a very anti-melee fight. First off, she will do something called Grievous Leap. This will jump to a random player, dealing damage and applying a permanent duration dot on them, and this dot is only reduced when it is healed above 90% HP. It doesn't do too much. You'll then jump back to the tank and apply the dot to the tank as well. It's kind of similar to the trash with the cats, only it deals a little bit less damage, and it can be removed with healing. So just make sure you keep your eye on who has the dot on them, and make sure you top them up, because otherwise you'll be having to deal with it for the entire fight. Another ability that she has is something called Primal Rampage. This will knock the target back, and then it will charge them, dealing damage to anyone caught in her path. But the charge that she does also knocks back, and the area of the charge seems to be way bigger than her actual hitbox. So melee DPS are actually knocked back, even if they're like standing way behind her. So either way, this causes you to be flying all over the room, and your melee DPS will be really angry at you. You've also got to keep moving as well because of a mechanic called Nightfall. This will place some goo on the ground that will deal some ticking damage to you. This lasts forever, this patch on the ground, but it doesn't hit too hard. However, it does mention in the dungeon journal that it might grow if you stand on it, but it doesn't seem to be acting that way right now on the alpha, so you might as well see these as maybe like little mini defiles sort of thing.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like at least, but right now that wasn't how it was working, so either way it's probably a good idea to move out of it, just so you're minimizing the amount of damage you're taking.
But overall, this entire fight pretty much seems that you just got to try and maximize the amount of room that you got to play with. Even without the Nightfall growing, like half the room was covered before we even did it. And I imagine it to be kind of like a soft enrage timer for most groups. So if you haven't got the damage, you won't be able to kill the boss in time. But overall, it's pretty simple, except with your melee DPS because you're running all over the place. You can try and get knocked back into a wall as a tank, but then she'll place like Nightfall there. So then you have to move anyway, and then she'll knock you across the room. It's awful. I don't want to tank ever again after this instance.
Now, after we actually killed the boss, she just despawned before we could even loot her.
Yeah, I was kind of sad 'cause she kind of comes out of a form, and I was like, oh, and I was like, oh, you don't actually get to see her despawn.
It's a bit of a shame. But anyway, you move along, you move on towards the rest of the instance, and then you'll start seeing these new mobs with the Cinderbark Ancients. These look amazing. They're just big burning trees. They have a few mechanics. They're pretty easy to deal with. It has like a war stomp. You just need to make sure that you're not within range of it, just to avoid the stun. They also spawn some goo underneath them that increases their attack speed, so you just got to make sure you move them out of the circle just so they don't destroy your tank. Apart from that, you'll also have like some flower mobs and some random patrolling packs. You kill all them off. Again, this instance is just jam-packed full of fucking trash. And eventually you'll find yourself going through a corrupted druid village and down into a misty, swampy area. In this area, you will have to deal with some dwellers that fear you occasionally, as well as more fire trees, but then you finally get on towards the next boss, which is Darkheart.
Who is a giant burning tree. Yeah. It's like the same model, but more big and scary. The boss himself, though, has a few mechanics that you need to deal with. One of them is Crushing Grip. This will pick up the tank and deal with some ticking damage over 5 seconds, and then they'll throw the tank at a target, and it'll deal damage to anyone who is hit by the tank. When you are picked up, you can still cast abilities, but melee range abilities were like kind of either out of range or it decided you were facing the wrong way. So if you did want to use an active mitigation before the ability, it does hit a little bit hard. You need to make sure you do it beforehand, not during the ability.
Which will probably be changed, to be honest. It seems like a bit of a harsh ability for a 5-man.
Yeah, especially on normal mode. It's kind of like Hands and Franz, if you remember. That was
later changed.
Yeah, so maybe they'll do that, especially on normal mode. Maybe it's a little bit vicious. So yeah, just make sure you got your group spread out, because of course when you land you will be doing damage in an AoE area, but you also want to spread out because of an ability called Strangling Roots. Now this will place a red circle underneath your feet. After a couple of seconds, it will activate and become a targetable mob. If you stand in it, it will root you for 1 minute and deal ticking damage, but you can remove the root by killing the mob. And the mob has very little health, so killing it off isn't too difficult, but it's still best if you are spread out though, so you can make sure you move from your roots without running into somebody else's roots. You've got so much space in this area where you're fighting the boss, there's no reason to be all clumped up. Now, it can be somewhat difficult to see your roots on the ground, because not only is the ground all corrupted and red, which is pretty much the same colour as these roots mobs, there's a bunch of mist all over your screen as well. So you've got to be very careful at seeing where these roots are.
The boss also has an ability where he'll knock absolutely everyone back and just do a little bit of nature damage to them. There doesn't seem to be really a way to avoid this. However, you do need to obviously position your characters in such a way so you aren't knocked back into the spinny red root shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that'd be, just be comboed. He also has a frontal cone breath that just deals ticking damage, so you can't really have the boss facing towards the raid. And that's more or less all he has. So ultimately, this fight is don't get caught by roots.
Yeah, and then just face the boss away. And if you are caught by roots, it doesn't even matter because you can just kill the roots anyway. It's quite forgiving, but the fight's kind of long. It kind of lasted a little bit too long, maybe.
It feels like something else could be added into that. Like
definitely.
It feels like it lacks an ability.
But it is normal mode, so of course there's always room to expand 100%. But in comparison to some of the other normal modes that we've done, this boss does seem very, very lacking. But yeah, it's quite fun. I really do like the idea of not being able to see the roots properly. Like, because you are supposed to be in a misty swamp and it's supposed to be hard to see, so you've got to really pay attention. And if you've got terrible graphics settings, then you're probably fucked. But still, it's pretty fun.
Now, after killing off Darkheart, you actually hit a fork in the road where you can decide either to go right, which is down towards the last boss, or you can go left, which looks like it's going to be an area for an optional boss. Of course, we had to check it out, so we did go left and went towards the optional boss, but we really, really wish we hadn't. I know in this video so far we've already complained about this instance having too much trash, but when you get in this area, you really do realise how much fucking trash is in this stupid instance.
The thing is, the trash in this place, like, especially in this bit, it's not really the volume, it's just how purely evil it is.
Yeah.
Like, they were full cackling with lightning when they created this trash. It's full on evil. Okay, so you enter the swamp, and it's full of eggs, and if you touch the eggs, some whelps come out and attack you. That's fine, so you got to make sure you stay away from the eggs. The whelps do a fair bit of damage, but they die nice and easy. However, the eggs do respawn, so you got to make sure that once the eggs are cracked, you don't stay near them because more eggs will just keep spawning. You'll also come across a giant water elemental, and this is where the problem starts. This guy has a ton of HP, and he only has 2 abilities. One causes an orb to fall from the sky, and when it lands, it knocks back nearby players, and I mean really knocks back, like 10 disengages worth of knockback, right into the eggs. So you get loads and loads of whelps spawning. The other ability he has is just an AoE knockback near him. into more eggs. And this mob, as I said, has so much AP that you're just sitting there getting knocked all around the place, just spawning more and more of these whelps.
You spend more time like killing the whelps than you do him.
Exactly.
Pretty much.
And the thing is that when he dies, he splits into little versions of himself that don't knock you back, but they just have a ridiculous amount of HP. So after being annoyed as you're flying around breaking more eggs than Leroy does, you sit there AoEing for about 5 minutes to kill some ads that aren't interesting at all. So hopefully they reduce the HP on the little ads that spawn afterwards. But in all fairness, the knockbacks, they're just hilarious. It is purely evil. That is a pug killing area. Like, you need to be organised when you're going in there, but it's very funny when you're flying around the place and the tank is shitting himself and so is the healer just trying to pick up all of these ads. It's really, really cool. But when you do finally get to the end of the swamp, you'll find a corrupted dragon surrounded by a load of eggs. And it's time to fight Dresseron.
Except Malik can't kill Dresseron.
No.
Well, they can white swing, but they can't use any abilities. This boss is like immune to them or something. It's just so
They
bugged.
just don't go off properly. It's like, it was a mess. And the thing is, we had 2 melee DPS in the group.
It just took fucking forever.
And we had a fire mage who couldn't use half their abilities because it was bugged as well. This fight lasted far too long. It's crazy.
Anyway, let's talk about the abilities of this guy. So he has a frontal cone breath that deals quite a large amount of damage and also reduces the amount of armor that the tank has. How this breath works, though, is that it will focus the initial location of where the tank was stood and then breathe a couple of seconds later on that location. So you do actually have time to avoid it. So you just need to make sure your tank runs away, basically. He also has an earth-shaking roar. This just spawns a large patch of like shit on the floor that just deals ticking damage to anyone that stood inside it. And this seems to always spawn underneath the boss, which is a little bit odd, meaning that you kind of have to move around him each time he casts it, which again is pretty scary considering all the eggs that are in the environment.
Yeah, because everything's so close. You don't have a lot of room to move about. And the thing is, that kind of comes to the next ability, and the funniest ability, which is Downdraft. He will push all players away from him and towards the side of the room.
Where the eggs are.
You know, where the eggs are. And the closer you are to him, the weaker the pushback. So if you're right underneath him, you're barely pushed back at all. However, if you're at range, so if you're closer to the eggs, you get pushed into the egg faster. Like Satan created this fight. It's so funny. So apart from the fact that Malik couldn't hit this guy at all, it was still a really, really fun encounter. It was always pretty scary when Downdraft came in, just in case you were swarmed by ads that do hit fairly hard without a cooldown. And the thing is, one of our melee DPS, because he got bored, bless him, he went AFK during this boss, and Downdraft happened, and he literally went across the entire side and broke all the eggs. I'm not a very good tank, okay? I'm learning to play Death Knight tank. That was not a nice experience.
Yeah.
When this boss is actually fixed, it's once again, this whole side just seems to be a pug killing area. It's just going to kill groups that aren't organized, but it's a very, very fun area.
Now, after you've defeated the dragon, you can jump down and join with the path that was heading over towards the right earlier, and this will lead you towards the last boss, which is sort of located through this tunnel.
Yeah, it's got all mists and stuff. It's really, really cool.
Pretty interesting. And that's when you'll finally see Malfurion. But first, you need to deal with the Shade of Xavius.
Yes, and the Shade of Xavius is a very interesting boss. It has a lot of cool ideas, however they're not working very well in its current state. He's got a dot that he puts on the tank called Festering Rip, and this is just a standard dot. It does some damage, reduces the amount of healing you take. However, it does a ridiculous amount of damage. Like, once again, as I said, I'm not a particularly great Death Knight tank, but I know how not to die within 5 seconds of being 100% to 0. He would annihilate me even with heals. So
even with CDs, even with Iron Barks and shit,
it was just ridiculous. So he was doing so much damage. Luckily, we had a bunch of combat reses, so we really did need them. He also does something called Feed on the Weak. This is a channel cast. It deals ticking damage to a random target over 5 seconds. The damage wasn't too crazy, but it's definitely crazy enough that you need to pay attention to it and make sure you keep that target up. But the main bread and butter of this fight is 2 abilities. One of these is Nightmare Bolt. This would deal some shadow damage to a player and then debuff them for 30 seconds. This debuff would cause them to be pacified and silenced for the entire duration, unless someone was stood inside the swirly circle that surrounded you. So basically, you had a nightmare and you need a cuddle in order to keep being able to heal and do damage, which is lovely. However, the boss doesn't like cuddling too much, no. So what he does, he applies a debuff called Induced Paranoia. This will debuff a target for 30 seconds and cause them to have a shadow patch around them. If anyone stands in their shadow patch, the debuff player would take a giant hit of damage and then be feared for 5 seconds. So the idea is that you cuddle up when you've had a nightmare and you fuck off when you have paranoia. The problem is that you could be cuddling up with somebody and then immediately, without a cast bar, or any time to react at all, you'll get paranoia and just be feared for 5 seconds. So you'll just take a giant hit and be feared out of nowhere when you have to react to the cuddling mechanic. So yeah, it made for a bit of an awkward fight overall.
Yeah, I mean, the two abilities work really well.
Yes.
The way that they sort of integrate with each other, but the fact that there's absolutely no grace period whatsoever or any time for you to react whatsoever to the debuffs, that's what's kind of shit about them.
Yeah.
I assume that will be changed like in a later patch at some point.
Yeah, I think they'll just either add a cast bar or maybe the paranoia won't activate until like maybe 3 seconds afterwards. So you can say, oh shit, I'm about to become paranoid. I need to make sure I'm not cuddling anymore and someone else needs to cuddle this player instead. But yeah, at the moment it's a bit of luck of the draw, so it makes the fight really, really awkward, especially when your tank's dead all the fucking time as well. But yeah, so that's what the boss does. You just got to keep going with those abilities. But once he hits 50%, he'll become untargetable and phase 2 will start. What you'll need to do now is remove the roots that are encasing Malfurion. During this time, he'll be doing ticking damage to the raid, whilst calling down a bunch of meteors that deal damage to anyone struck by them. Now, once you break him out of the roots, Malfurion takes a little bit of time to recover, and whilst you do that, you take on a fully healed Shader Xavier, so he's got all of his health back. At the same time, he's doing all of the same abilities. You know, you got to cuddle, you got to run away, and you got the dots and everything, but meteors are still raining down from the sky, so it's even more movement and a little bit more coordination of where people are. Now, once Malfurion recovers, he places a buff on the group which increases damage and healing done by 100%, and he heals you for 40k per second. This really does save you because it does feel super hectic because you're coming out of a heavy AoE phase and then you're going straight back into the fight that already does quite a lot of damage. Like,
but once this does kick in though, it's kind of
feel
easy. Pretty indestructible.
Yeah.
Even if you are feared and everything, I mean, it doesn't really
even matter. No.
Yeah. Because it's just such a strong buff. But yeah, it just continues from that point onwards until you finally kill him off, and then Malfurion thanks you, and then
lets you know that you need to go into the raid to actually properly kill him.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Overall, this instance just needs a little bit more polish. Of course, it is alpha. You've got to really make that clear, so there's loads that need to be done to it. The bosses have some cool ideas behind them. But yeah, it's just scaling and being able to hit them.
And it's just the trash. This place, I mean, this place is beautiful. They've executed like the aesthetic of the place brilliantly. Yeah. I think so, at least.
Yeah, it's really nice.
It's just the trash is ridiculous.
There is a lot of it.
It's so unnecessary. But anyway, thank you very much for watching, guys. If you did enjoy this little preview, then drop us down a like. It helps us out a lot. And make sure you subscribe. There'll be more videos coming over the next few days. And we shall see you in the next one.
Thank you for watching.
Thanks for watching.